Chairman, thank you. This hearing is dealing with the price that we've seen increases on in gas and natural gas and other fuel sources. Coal has skyrocketed in price. In fact, I would say under this president, the coal industry has done much better under this president based on the dramatic price increase for coal that's actually happening under this administration, the amount of exports and things that are actually happening. So my question is on the cost. I know that, Mr. Nally, you talked specifically about increased consumption worldwide and the production's not keeping up. Typically, in our market system, if consumption increases, production starts accelerating as well. Why is American production not increasing at the rate to be able to keep up with American consumption as well? With the prices like $80 on West Texas Intermediate and $5 a unit for natural gas, you would think that the production would continue to accelerate. Why is it not accelerating?
Just to clarify, you mean on crude oil, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I think it's a great question. We are pretty early in the recovery, but we're about 93% of where we were in oil production relative to 2019. I think one of the major contributing factors is the economic downturn. A lot of those P&E companies, investors, were hit pretty hard financially. I think they're trying to reposition themselves for the long term. So there's been a lot of written speculation about sort of why they're not coming back into the market quite as quickly.
Is the access to capital the same now for companies that deal with fossil fuels as it was in 2019, or is it harder for them to get access to capital now for investment?
I don't think it's harder necessarily, to my knowledge. I think it's just that they've trying to rebalance their bank balance sheets, pay off some debt, and then they've got some investment they've got to make in equipment and rigs to bring them back online. I think we are starting to see some increase in production in the Permian in particular. We do forecast that production in the U.S. will dip a little bit this year at 1% and increase in 2022. But we will not get back to the in the U.S. We will not get back to the 2019 level in next year.
There's been some conversation from the administration about releasing oil from the strategic petroleum reserves. What effect would that have on prices in America, short term and long term, for at the pump? What would consumers feel?
Well, we've done some analysis in the past. We've done some analysis recently. I think a release of SPRO, it can be complicated. We have to know some specifics about how much or when and what the market conditions were, when it would occurred, and so forth. But it would be, our analysis generally shows that it's pretty short-lived, a couple months, and that typically the other dynamics in the market would overtake any decrease in price. But ultimately, the amount of impact would be relatively short-lived. It would depend on how much was released.
Senator Barrasso brought up a quote from John Kerry, who's a special envoy for climate for President Biden, that in a statement that he made to Bloomberg in that interview, when he said in this, by 2030, the United States, we won't have coal. We will not have coal plants. Your administration, as your agency, as you're trying to be able to look for the future of energy and trying to provide energy in the United States, by 2031, do you expect us to not have coal plants in America?
No, we show, if we look at our AEO 2020, last year's AEO that we put out, we show coal reducing about 1% per year out through 2050. I think in 2050, we show it being roughly 75% of what it is currently.
There was some conversation earlier about the export of natural gas. So I was interested by that dialogue, that if we just cut off the export of natural gas, then will that solve price issues in the United States? Looking at the total market and the investment that's happening, you have different pipelines, you have different companies that are coming in place, you have drilling operations that are going after natural gas to provide to the domestic market or the international market. The infrastructure itself is being built up to be able to provide for the international market. If all of that investment went away, that we weren't investing for the international market and for the domestic market, what would happen to domestic prices?
Well, if you stop exporting LNG, it would certainly put a surplus or extra supply in the U.S. market. Prices would drop in the U.S. market. I think internationally they would skyrocket. And I think lower prices in the U.S. would probably discourage more production.
I think that would discourage more investment in the future, that you'd have less capital going into developing for the future. My perception of the markets are, as we're developing more and more facilities to be able to export, we're also developing more and more access here. If that went away with an extremely low price that we've seen in natural gas for years now, none of that investment would have occurred, and we wouldn't be well positioned to be able to continue to provide for our own needs.
I think that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very